Why hello you lovely little peppercorns, my name is Noa Lee and I've pretty much been looking forward to Cuphead ever since its initial announcement, but like I've said, I've also been worried that a game with this much focus on its art style might not turn out to play very well. Thankfully though, this isn't the case. Created by two brothers in their ragtag studio called MDHR over the course of 7 years, damn, Cuphead follows the hijinks of titular character Cuphead and his brother Mugman who have lost their souls to the devil in a game of craps. After promptly begging for their lives, the devil makes a deal with the boys that if they can hunt down and collect the souls of all of those who are in debt to the evil being, that he will terminate their contract and release their souls. And without hesitation, Cuphead and Mugman head out into their world of Inkwell and do just that. From the very beginning, Cuphead wears its inspirations proudly on its sleeve, telling its story in a fairy tale-esque fashion, complete with the camera diving into an open storybook a la classic Disney films and using vibrant but deliberately muted colors and a faux film grain overlay for good measure. It's clear, even in the early game, that a lot of time and passion went into this project and its stunning look, which of course makes it damn near impossible not to begin with the art style of this game when discussing it. So we're going to do just that. Each frame of every character is hand-drawn to the exact style of classic cartoons, and every background layer is hand-painted to further this aesthetic. Though the authenticity of this style gets downright bananas when you find out that each painting and drawing was done using the exact same technology as the old cartoons, to the point that the only modern-day tool that was used, outside of the Unity engine, was Photoshop, and that was only for the colorization process. The game itself runs at a smooth 60 FPS, but the animation holds certain frames at certain times so that it actually moves at 24 frames per second, the exact frame rate that most 1930s cartoons were animated at. And you can even see this in action if you cut out the frame holds and play back the gameplay at 24 FPS. This isn't a new trick in video games by any means, but the fact that the entire game was designed like this in order to optimize gameplay, which is best enjoyed at 60 frames per second, as well as to keep the filmic look of Golden Age cartoons at 24 FPS, and then keep that consistent throughout the entire game, is a phenomenal touch of animation genius. And when seen in action, or better yet played, you really get the sense that you're stepping into the world of a 1930s rubber hose era cartoon. Everything from the lettering of words to the ways characters bounce up and down and never stop moving to the batshit crazy and sometimes creepy facial expressions and mannerisms of each character is done in this style, and it really sells you on the experience. Now, when I first laid eyes on this game, my main concern came in the form of hit detection, as I played plenty of games with unique, hand-drawn art styles before, and most of them seem to suffer from poor collision detection and character hitboxes that are either way too small or way too big for the character you play as. But again, Cuphead has put these fears to rest, as its hit detection is damn near perfect. Each time you take a hit, you can be assured that it's your fault and not the game's, as you delicately try to weave in and out of enemy projectiles and dodge attacks. Most of the game comes in the form of boss battles as you try to defeat other debtors of the devil and receive their soul contracts. There are two different types of battles, those that you platform around the stage and those that have you taking flight in a plane for some shoot-'em-up action. Neither one of them is particularly better or worse than the other, with both of them managing to capture the unique magic of their respective genres, blending them together so well that they end up complementing one another rather than clashing. The on-the-ground bosses, as well as the few run-and-gun levels that we'll talk about in a sec, are clearly inspired by classic games like Contra and Gunstar Heroes, while the in-flight games give off a sort of Thunder Force R-type vibe. This means that much of your time will be spent learning enemy attack patterns, dodging, and looking for opportunities in which to strike in between bouts of getting your ass kicked. And get used to it, because you're going to be taking a lot of hits over the course of this game, because god damn is Cuphead hard. The bosses in this game are relentless in their attacks, throwing everything at you, including the kitchen sink if necessary. Or a laser beam, homing missiles, energy fields, robotic arms, and a giant cartoony magnet all at the same time. Like, you can see this, right? There is so much shit going on. But here's the thing, even though enemies will always go all out and sometimes a task can seem damn near impossible, there's always a way to overcome what's going on. And then the boss will change up its attack pattern, and usually its look, and then you'll have to start the process all over again. Damn. This could have been a major flaw with Cuphead if it wasn't designed so well. Each boss is set up to have multiple forms that they'll change to once you've dealt enough damage, and they always strike with the same attack patterns and transform in the same order. Though there are a few randomized elements here and there to mix things up, but once you've seen all of the boss's attacks and tells, you'll never find yourself getting hit from a cheap shot or something unexpected. You might not see it coming, but that's due to your own mistakes, not because the game did something unfair. Since the bosses also transform in the same order every time, it means that once you get a sequence of a battle down, getting to the other sequences isn't usually a big deal. However, this unfortunately means that the forms that the boss takes toward the end of the battle won't be practiced as much, and this could have become really frustrating, but the developers seem to have recognized this issue, and as such, most of the time the boss's final form is slightly easier and shorter than those found in the rest of the battle. Well, except for this Dr. Robotnik looking motherfucker who spams the same bullet hell attack for the final 2/3 of his fight. Just die already, you son of a... God fucking fucking damn it! Though, that's the exception, not the rule, as most of the bosses in the game follow a fairly similar difficulty curve, with the first form acting as a warm-up, the middle 2 or 3 forms acting as the difficult and tricky bits, and the final form is usually an intimidating but ultimately easier set-piece moment. Then there's the fact that when you die, you get to see a timeline of how close you are to beating the boss, as well as seeing how many forms they have and how long each lasts, complete with an enjoyable image of the boss's current form and a silly quip to lighten the mood or egg you on. Honestly, it's surprising, given how difficult Cuphead can be, that I didn't find myself getting angry at the game. There were times where I was frustrated or a little miffed at myself for doing something stupid that led to me taking a hit or dying, but I kept coming back for more, taking more and more hits, and eventually breaking through the wall. And god damn what a great feeling it is to finally take down a boss that you've been stuck on for hours or even days, and then knowing that the only change that led to this success was that you personally got better. And then the game will throw something else at you and the process will start all over again. But even then, the fantastic animation, lovable character designs, and upbeat, jazzy music kept me going. It also helps that each boss is very different from one another, meaning that from the beginning of the game to the end, there are very few repeated attack patterns or similar situations. Adding to this is the fact that there are a handful of different weapons and abilities for you to purchase using coins you find throughout your journey. Weapons and abilities whose usefulness largely depends on who it is you're fighting. One boss may be best dispatched using your standard pea shooter, while another may require something a bit more technical, like the roundabout here, which allows you to shoot backwards while running away. And at least for me, I found that the game got a heck of a lot easier once I started using the charge shot, and I wouldn't be surprised if they nerfed this thing in a future update. But the one item I'd say is almost a requirement is the smoke bomb. This ability lets you disappear into a puff of smoke while dashing, essentially making you invincible for a split second. It can take a little bit of getting used to, but once you do, a whole new world of kicking ass opens up. Then there are other abilities, like a couple that give you an extra hit or two at the expense of decreasing your damage slightly. These seem tempting at first, seeing as you only get 3 hits before you die and there's no way to replenish health while in a battle, but since these also decrease your damage output, I'd recommend avoiding these for most fights and focus on mastering the smoke bomb and parry abilities instead. And speaking of parrying, you're going to want to do it a lot. As you play, you'll come across objects that are pink and seem to clash with the rest of the game, and these are the very same objects that can be parried. You parry them by hitting the jump button while in midair, and by doing this, you not only remove that object as a threat, but you can also use the same ability to flip a switch or get to areas you wouldn't normally be able to reach. Parrying also has another huge benefit in that it fills your super meter, which is represented by these little cards next to your health counter. Each card you get allows you to perform the special attack of your currently equipped weapon, however, if you do this while the meter is full, you'll do a special super attack. Though, honestly, it seems like a bit of a missed opportunity to not have a mechanic in which you can gain a little health back through parrying. Since this action is such a challenging risk-reward maneuver to pull off, and oftentimes it's just better to dodge the object rather than risk taking a hit, it seems a little underserved that you only get a slight boost to your super meter for a successful parry. Maybe make it so every 5 or so successful parries you gain back 1 HP, or have an ability that when your super meter is completely full, you can cash it in for a little health. Since using your super meter for healing rather than attacking would add yet another risky, rewardy layer into the mix, I think this would only serve to balance the game even further, and it would practically eliminate what I would consider to be Cuphead's biggest flaw. That flaw being that if you take a hit or two early in the match, there's little reason to stick around, since if after that you make it a good portion of the way through the battle and take just one more hit, then it's back to the start with you, so the logical thing to do would be to just pause the game and restart the level if you screw up at the beginning, which I found myself doing. A lot. Apart from ruining the pacing of the match, it also means that the player is incentivized to get less practice on sections later in the stage, which is a shame seeing as practice is exactly what's needed in order to succeed. Having a mechanic that would allow you to gain back a little health, even if it was really difficult to pull off, would incentivize the player to stick around as they'd have a chance to turn things around after screwing up early on. Though ultimately this ends up being a minor issue that certainly didn't affect my experience all that much, and besides, Cuphead still has a lot of firepower at his disposal, so you always have the option of changing up weapons and abilities to try and make things a little easier. And this is something that Cuphead does really well compared to similar games like Contra and Gunstar Heroes, and that's that no weapon is better or worse than any other, except for perhaps the charge shot, but even that's rendered pretty useless in a couple of battles. In most games of this style, there are often certain weapons or combinations of weapons that are clearly better than the rest. Think of the spreader from Contra or the fire lightning combo from Gunstar Heroes. These weapons are so overpowered that all the other weapons pale in comparison, leading to this odd, not necessarily bad, balance that, once discovered, disincentivizes the player from experimenting with their arsenal. Cuphead, by contrast, has such a wide variety of varied enemies and attack patterns that the only way you're going to succeed is if you mix things up fairly often. However, if you're stuck on a certain boss, there is something else you can do to make things a bit easier. Before you start a boss level, you're asked to choose between simple and regular modes. Simple mode is basically a dumbed down version of the fight with fewer attacks and projectiles from enemies, as well as them having less health, with their final form being removed entirely. However, beating a boss on simple mode doesn't reward you with a soul contract, so you'll still need to beat the boss on regular mode in order to beat the game, which on the surface makes it seem like simple mode is ultimately pointless, but that's not entirely true. By beating a boss on simple mode, you do unlock new portions of the world map, just as you would for beating the boss on regular mode. So if you find yourself stuck on a handful of bosses, just beat them on simple mode to try your hand at other levels and come back later. Simple mode can give you a taste of what the battle will be like, while also giving you an opportunity to discern which weapons will have the greatest impact on the fight to come, so think of it more as a warm-up for the real battle rather than an easier difficulty setting. Then there are the run and gun levels. These levels have you trying to make it from start to finish, shooting up enemies along the way, and each level ends with a mini-boss of sorts. Much like the boss levels, everything in these stages is choreographed and pre-planned with very few randomized elements, just like the old-school run and gun games they're modeled after. These levels are a lot of fun and seem to show up at just the right moment in the world map so as to inject a little bit of variety into the mix. Though I can see some being disappointed by the limited number of these types of stages since there are only 6 of them in total. Personally, this doesn't bother me as the meat of the game, and indeed its overall design, is based around the boss levels, which are, in my opinion, more tightly designed and enjoyable to play anyway. This isn't to say that the run and gun levels are bad, far from it in fact, they're really well done and fun as hell, but compared to the boss levels, they come across more as a minigame or a side quest rather than a necessary addition. Plus, the bosses have an interesting design philosophy that takes their battles and cartoonish authenticity to a whole other level that just isn't as prominent in the run and gun stages. So if you've ever watched a series of Rubber Hose era cartoons that Cuphead is inspired from, you'll probably start to notice a pattern. A great deal of these Golden Age toons only had one singular location as well as only a handful of characters. Most of these were actually animated to play before feature-length films while people were getting popcorn or finding their seats, and as such they only tended to last for about 5 to 10 minutes, and they usually starred an already well-known character. This is why you saw characters like Mickey Mouse and Betty Boop in a wide variety of jobs and situations. Theater goers needed a self-contained story that can be enjoyed without prior viewing experience, and animators needed to keep things simple in order to reduce production time and cost. And Cuphead's boss battles feel very much like you're playing one of these short, self-contained stories in the library of works featuring a well-established and recognizable character. Similarly, on the gaming side of things, we find early game characters like Mario that also found himself in a wide variety of jobs and situations. In this game, he's a plumber. In this one, he's a carpenter. Now he's a doctor. He's whatever the hell's going on in this game. And I think MDHR recognized the similarity between the evolution of cartoons and the evolution of video games. The golden age of cartoons and the third generation of video games both occurred roughly 25 to 30 years after the inception of each, so blending the two together seems almost like a no-brainer, and I'm honestly surprised it took this long for someone to make it happen. And while the developers of Cuphead were clearly inspired by both the design of Rubber Hose era cartoons and the challenge of games from the late 80s and early 90s, they've also had the good sense to modernize a few aspects of each. For one thing, Cuphead is a hell of a lot more colorful than the cartoons it replicates, as well as a lot more polished, focusing on making sure different loops of animation transition seamlessly between one another rather than having the jarring jump cuts found in a lot of 1930s tunes. On the video game side of things, you won't have to worry about losing your progress or running out of lives, as the game autosaves as you go and the lives are unlimited, which makes Cuphead's difficulty a hell of a lot more tolerable. And while I'm sure there are plenty of people who are going to write this game off simply because of how difficult it is, I think the difficulty is exactly where it needs to be in order to accomplish what the developers had in mind. After all, Cuphead is paying homage to classic run-and-gun games, which are notorious for their insane difficulties, and plus I think this level of challenge makes sense from a narrative standpoint. Cuphead and Mugman have made a deal with the devil to hunt down those who are in debt in return for their own souls. The devil purposely gives them a seemingly impossible task that he knows the boys won't be able to overcome, so it makes sense that you'd have a rough time accomplishing your goal. And while there are a few points in the game where you can find yourself stuck on a single boss and unable to proceed until you defeat them, these instances are rare, and there are plenty of other challenges and secrets in which to take on in order to hone your skills, so they don't really become too problematic. Cuphead isn't going to be a game for everyone, and that's okay. While its 1930s cartoon aesthetic can certainly be appreciated by all, its adherence to the difficulty of classic run-and-gun games and horizontal shooters may be a hard sell for those who didn't grow up playing the likes of Contra, Gunstar Heroes, or Thunder Force. But personally, I love this game, and it's easily my favorite game released so far this year. It has a handful of minor issues, but nothing that's going to ruin the experience for someone looking for this type of game. Cuphead's gorgeous look, tight controls, and spot-on hit detection makes this a highly polished game that's destined to become a classic, while the level of love and passion poured into this title from its developer and their willingness to forego appealing to a wider audience in favor of making the type of game that they've always wanted to make is something that I definitely have to commend. I honestly can't recommend Cuphead enough, so stop listening to me blather on and just go play it already.